Much has been made of this whole ongoing collusion talk back and forth, but when we talked about all these subpoenas that went out yesterday, I'm not saying that the media refused to cover the whole story. They just buried what was an interesting kind of an item in that story. The three of the subpoenas went out to former Barack Obama officials, including some big heavyweights there, to the Hill's Molly Hooper and former Ted Cruz Chief of Staff Chip Roy. Now, one of the things we discover in all of this, Chip, and it's just maybe the nature of the beast, or the media just ignoring a problem that isn't there, they say, but former ambassador at the United Nations, Samantha Power, got a subpoena. Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, John Brennan, the CIA Director, all Obama administration officials. The panel wants details on all of this unmasking requests and why they were made. So I guess what I'm asking you, Chip, is why that story, those subpoenas were buried.
Well, thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me on. I find it very troubling that all the focus has been on this so-called collusion that's alleged to have existed with Jared Kushner, when, in fact, the meeting that everybody's talking about, which happened after the election in December, seems to undermine the whole story of collusion in the first place. A friend of mine, Andy McCarthy, wrote a great piece on that just today, making the point that if they were supposed to have this long-standing collusion going on, why would you need to have a meeting to open the channels of communication in December after the election? So that whole story seems to be getting turned on its head, and I think that's purposeful in that they are avoiding what the real problem here is, which is this unmasking. And the fundamental problem with the unmasking is that you're talking about the UN ambassador here. This is somebody that isn't normally in the chain when you're talking about looking at FISA records. And this whole issue with FISA, it goes to the heart of American security in a world right now, which you know, Neil, we are at a place where we've got people in the world who really want to harm us, and the FISA process is our way to try to get information to prevent people from harming Americans. And this undermines Americans' faith in the system when they find government collecting information and then using it for political purposes.
Well, yeah, and I'm not here to have anyone be a media critic, at least of all myself here, but I do find it interesting here that I always say fair and balanced, to subpoena anyone you want to on all sides, every side, resolve this story on the collusion charge and whether it sticks or doesn't stick, and then let the trail go wherever you want it to go or wherever it ultimately does go. I guess, Molly, with the exception, of course, of the fine Hill, what I'm wondering is the story could ultimately involve more than just the Trump administration. It could go back to the prior administration, even the administration before that one. It could also involve a pattern of leaking that has escalated. And last year, of course, during the race, that mattered a great deal, not only to many in the media, of course, but to a lot of Democrats. So I'm wondering where you think this is going.
Well, see, that's the interesting question. When I talk to Republican lawmakers off camera, of course, behind the scenes, the one reason they were so excited, or at least reassured, that Bob Mueller was tasked with being the special counsel is because, keep in mind, when you have a special counsel like that, he can go wherever the facts take him. And the one crime that they know has been committed is the unmasking and or the leaking of classified information to reporters. Not that the reporters are guilty, but that the people who have leaked the information are guilty. And Bob Mueller is one of those kind of folks, one of those kind of leaders who could get to the bottom of that. And that's what they're hoping is going to come out of this investigation by the FBI.
But wouldn't that be a kick if it turns out that ends up being the big story here?
Well, exactly. It's sort of a case of be careful what you wish for. And it's interesting that when we looked at those subpoenas that the House Intelligence Committee sent out, according to the Wall Street Journal story and some of my sources on the Hill, the Democrats on the committee did not sign off on the 3 subpoenas that were related to the unmasking. And so the minority...
How did they agree to that, by the way, Molly? Because I always thought it was a quid pro quo. Both sides said, we're going to subpoena people. I'm sure the Republican was going to say, look, I can't just subpoena Trump folks, right? I mean, you've got to go along with me to go after these, right?
See, one would think that, but again, if you're the chairman of the committee, you do have subpoena power. So,
True.
So Mike Conaway could you know, subpoena those folks.
And the ranking member could just, he might be annoyed about it, but he'll have to accept it, right?
He can leak it to the press that he didn't sign it.
That raises, no, Molly, that's a very good point, because Chip, one of the other things I thought about in this, and I wish I had more time, but the one thing I thought is, well, wait a minute, this could get much more involved and widespread than was initially thought. And I cannot imagine Mueller would be keen on these committees, you know, subpoenaing everyone as uncle, and maybe dividing for his task and what he's up to. In other words, these guys could be tripping over themselves.
No, that's right. I served a little bit as a federal prosecutor, and one of the things that we were trained is that, you got to have evidence at the center of what you're doing when you're looking at an investigation. And I think that Mr. Mueller is going to be looking into this. I think a lot of people have faith in what he's doing. And if you think about the subpoenas, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something there, but you got to have a good faith belief that there's something at the end of the rainbow if you issue a subpoena. And so they clearly have some concern about why the United Nations ambassador was having something to do with unmasking information involving American citizens for potentially political purposes.
And keep in mind, in between the time that Comey was fired and that first hearing with the House Intelligence Committee, the open hearing, he went before the House Intelligence panel behind closed doors and was there for about 4 or 5 hours. And so they were following up on questions that had to do with unmasking. I mean, the questions that he could not answer in public and in front of, obviously in front of the press and whatnot. So some of these subpoenas could be based on that, what they heard from him behind closed doors.
All right, guys, very interesting. I learned a lot. You guys, that's debatable if you learned anything here, but I mean, good stuff all.